Hello, welcome to this tutorial on Lazarus and the free Pascal IDE. So, in this session, in this part 1 of this tutorial, what I'm going to be covering are these topics. We're going to download and install the Lazarus and free Pascal, and we'll also develop a very simple Hello World application, and we'll look at the basics part of the IDE so you can get going. So, to download Lazarus, you need to go to www.lazarus-ide.org. This is the homepage for Lazarus. You can go look at all the announcements which are happening there. They got some good documentation here. There are a whole bunch of plugins you can highlight. You can see the highlights. You can see the news and announcement and whatnot. So let's begin. Let's begin by downloading the IDE. So when you click on the download button, it takes you to SourceForge, and you see these files listed. So you get, as you can tell, you got the Lazarus project, FPC LAS, FPC-LAS, and FPC_source. Now FPC files are the free Pascal files, free Pascal compiler and the compilers, and then there are a bunch of sources. All right, and then the Lazarus is the name of the development environment. So in terms of installation, you have to choose the files which correspond to the system. Now in my computer, I'm using a Debian inspired, a Debian derivative of Linux called Linux Mint. So I can download these files and it will work for me, but it may not be the case for you. So you have to choose what platforms work for you. So let's say you have to go home and you can choose, let's say if you're running on a Windows platform, then I would suggest that you go for a Windows option. So you've got the latest Lazarus Windows 64-bit options. You can click on that, and then you can click to the latest version. The version right now which I'm using is Lazarus 4 release candidate 1. Alright, so and you can click on it and you can download it. Or if you're using another version of Linux, or if you're on Mac or whatnot, you have other options. So you can click and download go into the Mac folder, and then you can download the files corresponding to it. Now in my case, I'm using Linux on x86. So I'll go into that and I'll download it. Okay, so what I've done is I've already downloaded these files. I've already installed it on my machine. So there's an order in which you need to install it. Now this order is important. Okay, so you first install a PC_LAS, -LAS. This is the compiler and a set of utilities which are needed for compiling, linking, and whatnot. You need to install that first. Then after that, you have to install the sources for the free Pascal compiler and a bunch of packages. Now these sources are very important for Lazarus. You need that for code browsing. You'll also need that if you want to develop additional components and whatnot. And following the installation of FPC SRC, then you can go ahead and install the Lazarus project files. Right. So now that is pretty simple. So the installation method will vary from machine to machine, but in case of in my computer, I basically just click on the file and I have an option. It presents me with an option of installing the package or not. So once I have gone ahead and installed it, so when I run it, this is what it looks like. Okay, so I installed Lazarus. As you can see, it opens up in next to no time. It's ridiculously fast. Within about 3 seconds to 3 seconds, it just opens up, and it gives me a very simple code right at the beginning as basically like a starter. So essentially, what it does is there are several parts of this IDE. Now this code where you can see, if you can see my cursor, there is a code. That's a code editor. As you can see, it's giving me a very simple bit of code. There's not a lot here. It's only about 26 lines of code, 25 lines of code. Now, what are the parts of this? We'll come to that later. But I just want to illustrate what you can do right at the beginning itself. So when you see this code, you can go ahead and run it to see what does this application do. So the way to run an application that you're developing with the Lazarus is you go and click on this run button. So when you click on this run button, you also have an option. You can do it from here as well on the run menu, or you can go straight into the thing and click on run. So when I click on run, it gives me the option as to how do you want to run it. Do you want to run it with a debugger or not? I am choosing to run it with a debugger. I am choosing Dwarf 3, which is the later version of the debugger, and I click on OK. So immediately it starts up. See, this is a compiled application which has been compiled it and ran it in under maybe about 3 to 4 seconds. That is the amazing thing about Lazarus and the amazing thing about Delphi. So the compiler is extremely fast, and you can develop applications, very sophisticated applications in Lazarus for the desktop, and now even for Android and other places very, very quickly. Okay, so let's begin by looking at the different parts of the IDE. Okay, so in terms of what I've covered, I've covered the downloading and installing the IDE, and we're going to get to the second part, which is developing a simple Hello World application. Now, as you can see, let's look at the code. Now, you have the code editor here, right? But you see 3 tabs over it. You have code, form, and anchor. We'll come to what anchor does later, but let's look at primarily the code tab and the form tab. The code tab is actually code of the application, right? And this name of this file is unit 1. Okay, now it doesn't need to be, that is the default name which has been given. You want to give it something else, you can go ahead and do it. For now, let's go with the default option of unit 1. Okay, and now the form is, what is this? What does this? How will this application look like in its design? What does the user interface look like? Now, the user interface can be defined either directly within the code itself, or you can define it via a visual designer. And so this is the visual designer. So how does one go about using the Lazarus visual designer? Now, if you look at Lazarus, if you see the screen, there are several parts of this screen. Now, this is the default IDE parts. Okay, so you have the file open, close, and whatnot. You have the project, you can create a project, open a project, and whatnot. You have edit for search and all that. Okay, now, but just below that, you see this tab, right? Because actually a bunch of tabs. You see the standard, additional, common controls, dialogues, data controls, and whatnot. Now, these are the list of, there's a huge variety of components that you can directly use, which comes pre-built, installed along with the default installation of Lazarus. Now, each of these components you can drag and drop onto your IDE and onto your form and use it. So in my case, what we're going to be doing is, I'm going to just for now drag and drop a button. So when I move my mouse over these components, it will show me, okay, this is a T button. Sorry. So I drop the button on this form. Now let's run this and see how does the button get displayed. So I'm going to run it again. Okay. So again, it recompiles it and it runs it in just a few seconds. Okay. Now I can see the button, but nothing happens when I click on the button because I have not written any code for it. Now when I go back to the code, you'll see that there is this T form 1, which is the name of this form which I've created, which is this form. You can see that, and there is on the left side you see the object inspector, which is a list of which is a way of, which allows you to basically set the values for the different components, and the form itself is treated as a component. The form is the Lazarus's equivalent of a screen. Okay, so a desktop screen, right? So a desktop application is consists of multiple screens, and so whenever you define a screen, you have to kind of use the form component. Okay, and by default, you get one form, but you can go ahead and create additional forms as well. So in this case, so in the form, when I click on the form, it gives me the list of controls that I can list of properties that I can set for this particular form. So if let's say if you want to change the color, if you want to change the caption, any of those things, I can go ahead and change this here. So for instance, if I can change right now the height is set to 240, let's say I want to change it to 300. You can see that the moment I change it, you can see it gets reflected in the design. Let's say I want to change the width to something else. You can go ahead and change it. So whenever you set anything in the object inspector, that property gets set for the form, and you'll immediately see the display change in the visual design. Alright, so now let's go back to, I'll make this, we can also change the height and width and all that. visually quite like this, just by drag and drop or just by moving the cursors. Okay. Now I've added the button. Let's add two more additional components. Okay. So I'm going to add a component called the label, and I'm going to change the label's text. I'm going to say message. Okay. I'm going to say message, and I'm going to add a input field, which I'll use for getting the what message display. I'm going to get that. I'm going to change the text that appears. I don't want edit one to show, so I'm going to go down and look at a property called text. I'm going to set that to empty. Okay. And just to make it easy for me to find the button, I'm going to, instead of saying edit one, I'm going to say ed, let's say message. This is just a way of giving a name to the component. Some of it might be beneficial. Now, when I go to the button component, so instead of saying button one, I'm going to say show message, right? And I'm going to kind of make the button bigger, so again the message doesn't get truncated. Yeah. So then I'm going to go change the name of the button. This one, button 2, I'll change it btn show message. Okay. Let's run this. So when I run it, again it shows. Again, nothing happens when I click on it. While this input field is there, I have not actually written any code for displaying the message from the field. So let's close again. Okay, I'm closing this application. I go back to the design, and I click on the button component. Now, on the left, you see the list of properties that you see in the object inspector, but you also see the list. There's another tab called the events tab. Right? The events tab is basically where all the events which can be triggered by this component will be shown here. Okay, so what I want is something to get triggered when somebody clicks on this button. So I choose the on-click event. Okay, and I just double-click it. I'll just double-click this component, then immediately generates an event handler for me, a stub for an event handler. Okay, so I go inside here and I basically say show message, which is the Delphi thing. As you can tell, it gives me code, gives me some hint as to what can come there. So message, it takes a string as an argument and displays whatever string that you give it. So in the case here, I'm just going to say, let's say I want to say hello world. Okay. So sorry, a single quote. Okay, and then let's run it. Okay, then I click on. So I've finished the hello world message, but I want to make it more complicated. Okay, more sophisticated. So when I click on this, you see the message hello world. Okay, let's change this. Let's change it such that it is able to display whatever is put into the message box. Okay, so instead of putting text like hello world directly, I'm going to just take whatever message is given in that input box. So whatever message comes from there. So again, you get hints. It gives you the Lazarus IDE gives you allows you to it's simpler for you to know what and all properties are there against each component. Okay, so I'll run it. Okay, now when I click on message, nothing displays because nothing has been entered here. Let's say I want to change this to Happy Christmas. Okay, let's click on this again. Happy Christmas, it shows up. Alright, so this is a very simple application which we just developed. It took us just a few minutes to develop. It's very fast, it compiles really quickly, and that's just that introduction to what you can do with Lazarus. In part 2 of this video, we'll delve well into more depth into what you can do here. I hope you like this video. If you like this video, please subscribe to this channel and please follow what's going to happen here. Thank you so much.